This week, we welcome Ailsa McHardy, a registered paediatric dietitian with an interest in plant-based diets to the nutshell. She's a paediatric dietitian with 14 years of clinical experience, and she's a mum to 2 children, so she understands the challenges faced by families when it comes to healthy nutrition for children. So, hello Ailsa, welcome to the podcast. We are really looking forward to speaking to you today.
Hi Claire and Daisy, thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to join you. I love listening to the podcast and I think we've got so many interesting and hopefully insightful things to talk through.
Brilliant, thank you. Welcome Ailsa. So as a paediatric dietitian, you're obviously seeing children of all ages who eat in different ways. Can you tell us what are the current trends when it comes to children's diets in the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think firstly, it's really important that we highlight that there's so many different factors that influence and impact children's diets. There's such a range and we often maybe simplify it, but it's a very complex thing. So things like food choices at home and modelling behaviour and language used that can be controlled by parents, but also lots of things like the availability of healthy food choices and budget and marketing and the availability of resources that families have, as well as poverty and education. It's not a simple thing. I think in terms of current trends, to put it plainly, and probably as no surprise, it's not good. We see really poor fibre intakes, high salt intakes, high sugar intakes, high intakes of saturated fat, as well as lots of processed meat in children, but perhaps even more so with teenage children. This is obviously a problem and doesn't bode well for their future health. In terms of things like obesity rates, which obviously is an important marker for health and health trajectory for children, obesity rates and overweight rates at the moment are slightly less than they were at their peak, which was during the COVID pandemic, but they generally remain high. So there's different data for the 4 devolved nations of the UK, but probably around 20% of children in the UK starting school will already be either overweight or obese, and that therefore means they've got longer that they're having this increased risk of weight and obesity related health conditions. It's not a good place that we're in at the moment. And we know that children that have got overweight or obesity in childhood are much, much more likely to maintain that throughout adulthood. So they're much more likely to be overweight adults and have increased risk of all the different conditions that we know link with that. And then I think we also need to take into account the impact it has on things like self-esteem, mental health, well-being, stress and anxiety, and all of those sorts of things. So it's complex. It's really complex. There's lots of factors that are involved in child health and in the general trajectory of children's health at the moment. We're not in a good place at the moment, I would say.
And you mentioned fibre in particular. Children aren't getting enough fibre in their diets and sort of too much processed food, too much processed meats. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you as a dietitian have an interest in plant-based diets and why you think children should shift their diets towards being more plant-based?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if I could have a tagline, it would be that I would love to see more children eating more plants more of the time. The fibre issue is a really significant one. So we know that children in the UK on average eat far less, even just fruit and vegetables, than what we should. So average number of portions per child is much lower than the recommended 5. And we also know that recommendation of 5 a day is quite pared back when we compare it to other countries where they've got a recommendation for much more. But we're still not managing to hit that 5 with children. So fibre plays a hugely important role for children in a range of different things, but in terms of maintaining good bowel habit and regular bowel function, ensuring a healthy gut microbiome that we know increasingly is important for just about every, if not every aspect of our wider health. And then also just the role it plays in displacing other much less nutritious things from the diet. So if we're not eating those fibre-rich foods, where is the energy coming from? And the likelihood is that it's coming from foods with a much lower nutrient density and perhaps much more salt and sugar and saturated fat. I think increasing fibre intakes in children is a really important thing. And I think we do see that there is drive towards doing that. So there's, the different schemes in schools in terms of providing free fruit to children or having benchmarks around how many portions of fruit and vegetables have to be offered as part of school meals and that kind of thing. But there is always more that we can do.
Yeah. And I think during this episode, we'll go into a bit more detail about how not just individuals can change, but what roles schools and other organisations have to play in this. But say you have a family who are plant-based already, or vegan family, there's sort of an ethical decision or a moral decision. Is it safe for them to raise their children 100% plant-based?
Yeah, so I think we have got really clear evidence and really clear guidelines that, yes, it is absolutely safe. I think there is still a school of outdated information, and I still regularly hear people, as I'm sure you do, suggest that a plant-based diet or a vegan diet can't provide, it can't be enough. Where do they get protein from? Where do they get iron from? How can you possibly do that? I meet people quite regularly who are raising vegan or plant-based children, who have been told by other either family members and sometimes also healthcare staff that it's cruel, that it's abusive, that it's inadequate, and these sorts of things. And it's very hard to hear that, I think, because from my experience, and obviously the people that I work with in my clinics are coming because they're thinking about nutrition. So it's not that it's a by the by for them. They're actively thinking about it. But I often reflect that they have, or their children have, some of the best diets that I've ever seen, because they're thinking about, where are they getting iron from? Where am I making sure that they're getting enough of X, Y, and Z from? Which the average family doesn't do. The average family is not thinking about that. I have got no doubt whatsoever that you can bring up a perfectly healthy child on a completely vegan diet if that is the family's choice. And I think we have, up until fairly recent years, we haven't necessarily had huge bodies of evidence to back that up. But I think we are increasingly now, and obviously with the publication of the VCHI studies a few years ago, we are now starting to have that body of evidence where we can say, look, we've got really clear data. We're starting to have that body of evidence. And I think that is helpful both for us as healthcare professionals to feel confident that, yes, this is absolutely a lifestyle that we can support from a health point of view, but also for families to be able to feel confident that yes, this is a good choice for my family and for my growing young children.
We're going to come back a little bit towards the health problems with having meat, particularly processed meat and red meat. And we know that they increase the risk of developing chronic diseases later in life. We've got all that evidence from the World Health Organization now. And not that long ago, there was a Food Foundation report called Meat Facts, which came out, which had some pretty depressing statistics on how much processed meat children are eating, that they're eating proportionally more processed meat than adults, and that, for example, 9% of all the meat that children are eating is found on pizzas. So thinking about what schools can do, what we can do in our education system, what do you think the role is there for changing diets of children?
Yeah, so firstly, I absolutely agree that the issue with processed meat and the quantities that children are eating is a real concern. And on a personal level, I find it really hard to wrap my head around why we are still serving processed meat to children in early year settings and in schools. We have to have perspective, and we have to acknowledge that at home or on a different level, people make choices that aren't always guided by what's the best health choice. I think we can probably all relate to that in certain aspects of our lives, that there's things that we do that aren't just about what's the healthiest choice. But I think that is very different to what we're actively doing in nurseries and in schools. And I think we should be doing so much more, really. We know that the World Cancer Research Fund lists processed meat as a carcinogen with no safe level of intake. So just for people listening, I'm sure people will know something about this already, but there are other foods where they list them as intakes above a certain level are a problem, or intakes above a certain level are associated with a certain degree of risk. But for processed meat, we don't have that safe level. So it's not like there's necessarily any evidence of a safe level of consumption. It's just not a good thing for us to be including in our diets. And I think, again, it's, for adults to make that choice in an informed way, that's okay. We have to accept that people make a range of different choices, and they can be informed choices, and they might still decide to do something that is not necessarily the most health focused choice. But that's different for children. They don't make that choice. They don't read this evidence and then decide what they want to be fed or what they want to be on their menus at nursery or school. So I think there's definitely so much that needs to be done. I think it's important and fair to be really clear that in terms of early years catering and school catering, the trend is towards really vast improvement. So it is so much better now. The guidance around it and the foods that children are offered is so much better than it used to be. So I grew up in I was reading at primary school in the 90s and was absolutely that kid that loved school dinners. I would have been there first in the line. I would have wanted seconds. I would have been back for pudding. I loved it. But I really clearly remember things like turkey Twizzlers, Frankfurter sausages, nuggets, and all of that kind of thing. That was just, it was like every Friday or something like that. It was really standard that those were there. So I think we have come so far in terms of school meals, and I think it's also really important to give a bit of airtime to the work that's involved in doing that. And I often reflect on I've got 2 young children, and I'll try and make them a meal, and invariably one of them will say I don't like it or refuse to eat it or whatever, and that's me that knows them and knows what their food choices and preferences and things are. So for anyone to be trying to cater to a school of 500 children and come up with options that are suitable on a nutritional and cultural and preference level is a very, very enormous, it's kind of an enormous and very, very difficult task for people. I think we have to give credit where credit is due. We're trying, and things are improving just from personal experience. So my children don't eat meat. They would have occasional fish, but at school, but I am aware of seeing processed meat on school menus still. Infrequently, but it's still sometimes there. So those options are still there for some children. But there is definitely a trend towards the inclusion of more plant-based options. So she would be offered where we live. It's like citywide catering, so the whole of the city gets the same options. But they regularly have things like chickpea enchiladas or corn fajitas, vegetable and sweet potato curries, and that kind of thing. The options are always on there, which is brilliant to see. But the thing that's always the challenge is it can be there, but that doesn't mean they're going to eat it. And if you then they're in the queue with other children that are having other options and they think, well, why did I not get to have that? They don't look at it and think I'm going to choose that because that's a healthier choice that's got more fibre in it, or that looks like it's probably lower salt. That's not what they're thinking of. But in terms of the guidance across the UK, so we've got different guidance for these settings for each of the 4 devolved nations. The setting the table guidance, which is what's used in Scotland, and that's quite recently been updated, is based on the Eat Well plate. So it's not overly specific about the use of processed meat, but it does try to have meals that fit in with the Eat Well plate. And then in England, they've got different guidance, which does use wording around limiting processed meat, but again, not completely avoiding it. And I would love to see just avoid it. If I could click my fingers and just make that change. But one of the things that is really good in the early years guidance that we have in the UK is that they both make reference clearly in their wording to vegetarian and vegan diets being perfectly acceptable for young children. And I think it's really nice to see that, because hopefully that means we're moving away from it's not adequate, where do they get protein from, where do they get iron from? It's starting to just be routinely in guidelines that it is fine. On a personal level, the options that I see when I take everything into account in terms of what a school is trying to provide, what a nursery is trying to provide, and all the boxes that they're trying to tick in terms of culture and allergies and preferences and everything, I'm generally really impressed by the things that my children are offered at school and at nursery. But I know it varies a lot in different areas.
Right. Okay. Thanks for giving us that overview of the guidelines. That was for me really useful, because I think sometimes I don't understand those challenges fully in terms of what schools are actually trying to do to deliver something that children will eat, and then what they've got to do almost legally there. Now, it's a really long time since I was at nursery, but I do remember sort of playing with, one of the things that I liked to do was to set up a farm and playing with plastic cows, plastic sheep, pigs, and little fences that you could build. And it made me think about those early years and about what might be being said to children today in terms of the food they're eating and where food comes from. And I wanted to ask you what you felt we should be saying in terms of how much we should be talking about where food comes from, and particularly where we have to talk about meat and animal products.
Yeah, so I think this is such a great question. I think in the general population, it would probably divide opinion a bit. I think probably less so with your listeners. I imagine people listening will probably think they'll know what they would feel comfortable with. So I can really talk only from sort of a personal point of view, I suppose. And for me, having children myself and then feeling the weight of kind of making decisions, not only for me, but for other people that I have brought into this world, has really been a turning point for me in terms of how I think about where food comes from and how I think about how I'm going to explain it to them. So it really shines a light on that and makes you think differently about it. I just feel comfortable that if my child asks me in 10 years' time, well, Mum, why did you make that choice for me? I'm more comfortable justifying it this way than I would be the other way. And that's kind of how we've reached that choice. But in terms of speaking to children about food, my belief is that it is fair and right for children to know and understand where their food comes from. I think, like we've kind of alluded to a bit earlier, we have to be sensitive to the fact that their cognitive abilities are not the same as ours are as adults. They can't think through things necessarily in the same way that we can. And how I would approach it at home would be to be really literal but sensitive with the language that I use. So just as an example, my 5-year-old would know that beef is not just a food that you buy in a food shop. She would understand that it is a meat that comes from a cow, and for that meat to be got, that cow needs to be killed. She understands that, and I would just explain it in that simple language. I would avoid anything overly emotive with her at this age, because they haven't got the skills to understand what's okay to then go and say to someone else, or what's okay to say to someone else at school who's eating meat. So that would kind of be how I would approach it. And when we're in the supermarket, I genuinely wouldn't be walking down the meat aisle, but if they see it in a shop and say, "Oh, what's that?" I'll explain to them that's pork that has come from a pig that has been killed to get that meat. They understand that, because I think children don't necessarily always understand that. They think ham and chicken is something that you buy at the shop. They don't have any link between that and where it actually comes from. I think it's important and fair that children do know, but that is, I think, for balance, we have to acknowledge that different families and people have got different values. And I know that there are many people with young children where the family does eat meat and the children do know where it comes from. And they might be involved in, they might be farming families. They might be very involved with it. They might know exactly where it comes from and be comfortable with that. And I think just in respect to everything, we always see the best progress where we can find common ground on any issue. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that there are differences of opinion in terms of whether that is right or wrong. But my belief as a parent, as a children's dietitian, as someone that's got an interest in plant-based health, and obviously also in raising well-balanced and good people, good children of my own, is that we should be honest with them. I think that's kind of would be my personal opinion and personal approach to it.
I love that, because I just think you have to be honest with children. If they ask you, it mustn't be hidden. And I think that's my only sort of sadness about the way we talk to children is the fact that we hide things from them. And I think you're right, it has to be age appropriate. But there are resources, aren't there? I've heard of organisations like Vine who do resources for schools who are interested in teaching a bit more about not just the health benefits of, plant-based, but also the ethical considerations.
Yeah, absolutely. They have really good teaching resources. I think it's probably just schools are trying to achieve increasingly so much that is so beyond just educating children. There's so much pastoral care that's involved. There's so many social challenges. There's so much that they have to do that it probably, I imagine, it might not be a huge priority issue for them. But yeah, definitely there are resources there from Vine that can be used if people want to. And I think, if it's something that listeners are interested in or would like their early years setting or school to be taking a bit more of a lead on, then I think it's absolutely fine to discuss that with them in a way that is mindful of how much they are trying to achieve every day with increasingly reducing resources, just like we see in other parts of the public sector.
Yeah, it can be a challenge. But I think from a climate change perspective as well, it's something that really needs to come into the curriculum, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But anyway, let's move on.
Yeah, it's a difficult area, that's for sure. But moving on to, if we're talking about things that, might look or taste like meat or dairy, these plant-based alternatives, there's been a lot of negativity around them, particularly at the moment because of the studies that have come out on ultra-processed foods. And of course, on the podcast, we know that there's a lot to unpack there. It's very nuanced. Not all processed foods are equal. Not all ultra-processed foods are necessarily terrible. So what can we say to, I don't think, we were thinking of asking you about what we can say to plant-based parents about meat alternatives. But actually, I think as these are coming onto the menus in schools, we need to be thinking about what we can say to parents about the benefits or risks of processed plant-based foods, such as the meat alternatives, and then maybe even some of the cheese alternatives as well.
Obviously, you've discussed it on the podcast before about the nuance that's needed when we talk about ultra-processed foods, but they absolutely aren't all created equal. And some of them we know make a really valuable contribution to nutritional intakes in children in the UK. So just as an example, anyone that I've worked with before will probably know that breakfast cereal is one of the foods I talk about all the time, and how great it is and how accessible it is in terms of a really good range of nutrition and fibre and micronutrients and things. But a lot of age groups of children in the UK get the majority of their iron intake from breakfast cereal. So that's whatever dietary pattern they follow. Some of these ultra-processed foods can be hugely useful. And obviously the issue is where they're making up the vast majority of an intake rather than pieces of that puzzle that also includes lots of whole food options as well. From the perspective of just a parent, I always encourage people to allow yourself to have some convenience within your diet. So when I meet people that want to have a completely unprocessed diet, they want no convenience foods, or they've been made to feel like that's really bad if they're using a tin of baked beans, or if they're using something out of the freezer, or they're using corn mince or something, that they think, oh, that's bad because it's processed. And actually, I would always say to people, plan to have some of those options in your diet, because it will make things much, much easier. You know, we've only got so many hours in the day to spend meticulously planning exactly what we're going to eat. I would absolutely encourage people to use convenience foods where they need to make their diet manageable. So in terms of plant-based meat alternatives, they've got lots of benefits often. So they're generally quite good fibre sources. They're very readily available sources of protein. They can be really easy. They can be cooked really quickly. They're good options from that point of view. They're much lower in saturated fat and cholesterol than the meat alternative might be. So even for families who are thinking about reducing meat intake, I would often suggest swap from a meat version of a convenience food to a plant-based option of a convenience food, and it will infer some benefit. Probably it will help with increasing fibre intake, and it just makes those steps a bit more manageable. I think often for people that I meet in work and out of work who think, oh, I would love to have a much more plant-based lifestyle, but I feel like I can't go all in right now. I'm not able to do that. That seems like too big a task. Actually, just these little steps of, well, take that thing and change it. Just take something else out of the freezer when you go shopping. That can be a really nice stepping stone for people. So nutritionally, obviously, they're not whole foods. They won't necessarily have all the nutrition that another thing might. But in the context of a healthy meal or overall of a healthy diet, I would have absolutely no concerns with people having them relatively regularly. So just for context, probably at home when I do a food shop, I would choose one thing a week that would go in the freezer, and that would be for the day where there's less time to prepare something. That would be the option that there was. I would always encourage people to just look at the ingredients and try and choose a lower salt option where they can, because one of the issues with these processed plant-based meats often is that they're quite high in salt, and I tend to find that the plant-based like mince alternatives, so soya mince type products, are often the ones that are much lower, and they're often much cheaper than the meat-based option would be as well. So again, for people even who aren't generally following a particularly plant-based diet, food costs are huge. I feel like I've turned into my grandma. When I go anywhere and buy anything, I'm constantly stunned by how expensive everything is. So that can also offer a really good cost saving as well, but for something that's still a really nutritious option. So absolutely no problem with including them. I think on school menus, they have a place, definitely. They're that stepping stone from things that would otherwise perhaps have been meat-based options. They're accessible. They're generally great sources of protein, but it's just using them in moderation, which I think is the word that we would say about so many things.
I'm so glad you said that about breakfast cereal and baked beans, I think we mentioned as well, because those are two of the foods that I spend a lot of time promoting instead of, because of that 10 grams or in a portion of 2 Weetabix that you get, which kind of gets you a third of the way there in your fibre. I'm always amazed at how something like soya mince, just the textured vegetable protein that you get dried, I'm so surprised that it hasn't taken off as a beef mince alternative. I know that we know about it as plant-based eaters, but it's actually relatively difficult to find in the supermarket, or you have to buy the frozen sort of hydrated one. I don't know why that is, but it does taste really good in a bolognese, I think.
Yeah, I've seen it lots. I feel like I only see it in like refill shops or in kind of really cute like health food shop type things that sell loads of different lentils and grains and stuff. That's kind of the setting that I would tend to see it in. But I think there is, and I know maybe we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but I think there is still a lot of misunderstanding about soya, and there's a lot of understanding that using soya is environmentally bad, or maybe there's myths around the health impacts of it. And I often, when I go food shopping, I mean, I try and kind of focus on what I'm doing and not pay too much attention, but it is really difficult not to hear little bits of other people's conversations whilst you're standing looking at things and going, oh no, we can't have that, that's really bad because it's got XYZ in it, or I can't buy that plant milk because it's really bad, it's got this ingredient in it, and those sorts of things. And I just want to say, it's fine. Put the soya mince in your basket.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. I mean, what can we say to parents? And you know, and as a GP, I hear that all the time as well. That oh yes, but there's something bad about soya, isn't there? And they're not really sure what it is, but it's just got this negative association with it. Is soya safe for children? Is it? I mean, what can we say to them about that?
So firstly, very clearly, absolutely, soya is safe for children. It's safe for all age groups. It's a great thing to include in the diet for lots of different nutritional reasons. And I think a lot of the misinformation around it comes from research from a really long time ago that were animal studies where animals were eating. So it's about fields of sheep that ate only clover that was high in phytoestrogen that is similar to estrogen. And I think that's where the theory came from. But we know, as people that are used to looking at research, that that is not a useful way of predicting what would happen in a human person who ate a portion of soya once a day or 2 portions of soya a day. That's absolutely not the same thing. But I think above all else, it really highlights how this like misinformation or something from decades ago, like I remember reviewing that research when I was a student, and that would have been like, 15, 20 years ago, that then it was outdated. But there's certain things that just seem to really persist, and it can be as simple as something like it's just what your grandma said. So then your mum said it to you and now you think it, and now and these things that just kind of perpetuate. Hopefully now we're more in a time where, for all the downsides of things like social media and the internet, we've got much more information available. Obviously the problem is you need it to be the right information, and that's not always the case. But yeah, so I would reassure anyone and everyone all the time that soya is useful and really nutritious thing to be including in our diet. So, it's great in terms of protein and in terms of calcium, but also we know longer term, we're thinking, for our children now, they're going to grow into adults, and what we're thinking about is their long-term health. And we know that soya products can be helpful in terms of things like cholesterol. There's also some evidence that it can be beneficial in terms of reducing risk of certain types of cancer. And we know that it's a food that's eaten very commonly in the global blue zone, so where we see these areas where people have got great health and longevity. So yeah, I would have no concerns whatsoever. I couldn't be any more clear.
No, but you just need to spend more time in the supermarket, I think, Ailsa, talking to those people as they're reaching into the freezer section, or if they're lucky enough to have a packet of dried soya mince, you need to be encouraging there.
Yeah, definitely.
On your campaign.
Yeah, or the frozen options as well. I mean, I genuinely think when I see what a week's food shop costs for 4 of us at home, that will be a trolley of almost entirely plant-based food, where the majority of meals will be made with things like lentils, or chickpeas will be the protein sources, or tofu. I genuinely think, how are people managing if they're not eating in this way? How are people affording the other options? It's crazy.
Yeah. Can I go back to asking you about, Claire mentioned the processed meat alternatives, but cheese alternatives? Because, I mean, my son's grown up now, but when he was little, before we were vegan, he was slightly cheese obsessed. And I think a lot of children do like cheese. So if you have a plant-based family, what do you recommend as a good cheese alternative?
Plant-based cheeses, I think, in terms of, they provide a really useful option, both for vegans and those for a preference with plant-based foods, and also those living with allergies and intolerances. So I would use them, or would work with families who use them across all of those different areas to provide an alternative to dairy versions, which is good in terms of inclusion, in terms of having an appropriate alternative or something that looks similar. Purely from a nutritional point of view, I would say they aren't that great. So the The plant-based meat alternatives nutritionally, I would say, are good. Plant-based cheese alternatives, if I was thinking solely about nutrition, they're not that great. They're generally, obviously they're made with fat, usually with coconut fat, so they'll be high in saturated fat, often high in salt, and then the fortification of them is generally quite poor. So there's not one that springs to mind where I think, oh, that's a great one, because it's really well fortified with calcium and B12 and iodine or anything like that. But they can be helpful, particularly for young children, where we know that saturated fat intake is actually really important. For vegan and plant-based children, it's often one of the things that we have to almost focus on a bit, is making sure they're having enough fat and enough saturated fat. Sometimes their diets might be a little bit low in it, so they can be useful from that point of view. But in general, I would just encourage moderation with them. And in terms of a more nutritious option, nutritional yeast is great. And you could even just use both of them together. And it can obviously be added to anything savoury. I'm sure that lots of people listening, it will be part of their diet already, but it's a fantastic source of a really big range of micronutrients in a really small volume. And from a nutrition point of view, it would be better probably than most of the plant-based cheeses that are available.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't know what nutritional yeast was before I went vegan. I'm just thinking, do people actually know how great this product is?
Yeah, I know, it is really good, isn't it? Because you can just add it to so many things. I always think it looks like goldfish food. I don't know if anyone if anyone had a goldfish when they were little. I can imagine people opening it and thinking, oh gosh, is this what this is supposed to look like?
But we blend it with nuts and things and make it into a cheese sauce. It's just brilliant. It's just really,
or added to anything. I would put it even in like savoury muffins. I would sometimes use it in, or any kind of pasta sauce or soup or anything like that. And I do the same. Again, anyone that's listening that knows me or follows me on social media, they'll think, oh gosh, she's speaking about cereal, kids cereal again. But Ready Brek or Ready Oats type cereals are another thing that I always or very often encourage people to add to things for a nutritional boost, but also it can be really helpful in adjusting the texture, so to make thinner textures more spoonable for babies or for when children are learning to self-feed, as well as adding lots of calcium and iron. It's a really easy thing to add a spoon of to soup or to yogurt or to a smooth sauce of any kind.
Oh, I love that. That's a great tip. Yeah,
I should have shares in them because I speak about it so often. But I always say the own brand ones are just as good. Doesn't need to be a designer one, and I don't fork out for the designer one myself.
Yeah, but like Claire said, I'm glad we talked about cereals and instant oats, because I think it's almost like we need guidance on actually how different the ultra or processed foods are, so people stop worrying about bread and cereals and knowing that they're not in the same category as biscuits and whatever sugar sweetened beverages.
Yeah, it can just give people such anxiety, and it really shifts the focus to something that probably isn't actually the problem.
Exactly.
It's not that's the problem. I remember meeting a friend who had recently read about a medic, but not in the nutrition field, and had read about ultra processed foods, and she was absolutely terrified of sliced bread, and she was genuinely, I could tell that there was really significant anxiety. She had this fear of it, and her kids were eating this delicious focaccia from the deli at the top of the road that was cost like £7, and she was like, this is the only bread I can let them have. They can't have sliced bread because it's really, really bad for them. I've read about it, and I remember really feeling like empathetic towards that level of anxiety that she was feeling, and I thought, gosh, you're very well read in health and in medicine, and this information is even scaring you. There's really something that's wrong there. And I think the other thing to add very often, and I'm sure that you see this across the board as well, is that the people who are already attending to that information and listening to it are often not the ones where actually the diet is the biggest problem. It's the people that aren't paying attention to things. So when I meet people in clinic and they say, oh, we're worried because they don't eat fish, we're worried that they're not getting omega-3, like where could they get omega-3 from? And then I often reflect that I've met hundreds of families in my career, or maybe thousands, who were not plant-based or vegan. They never asked, where does my child get omega-3 from? But I'm certain that they weren't eating, those sources of it. So we're almost more like really tuned in to so much information about nutrition when a choice that we've made or when a lifestyle that we have has got a nutritional element. So yeah, I always encourage people, step back and think overall, what does your overall intake look like if you lay it out on the table for a week? How's it
Yeah,
looking?
it's a really good point. Yeah.
Is it colourful? Is there lots of fruit and veg on it? Is there lots of fibre, and is there lots of beans and nuts and that kind of thing? And if it is, then it's okay for there to be some things in packets or some things out of the freezer or some sliced bread as well.
I think sometimes it's the overall problem seems too big and too overwhelming. So it's that thing about where we focus on one detail. And I know my heart sank when Dr. Rupi of the Doctor's Kitchen, he did an Instagram reel with a packet of sliced bread, sort of saying this is one of my big hates. And I thought, oh no, I'm telling people to have wholemeal sliced bread all the time, put it in the freezer because it's economical, you can just take a slice out at a time. And then you've got a doctor saying don't do this, and I'm thinking focus on the big picture.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have got kind of emerging evidence, and I think over the next few years it will increase around specific emulsifiers and the role that they might have in gut health or in gut inflammation and in changes to the gut microbiome. But it is absolutely about the bigger picture and what's the priority for this. And I think as well with I'm sure in general practice and also definitely in my dietetic clinics, what you have to do is think you've got this whole world of information that we have access to that we can kind of process and whittle down. But what we need to think about is this person in front of me. What is the kind of really important issue for them at the moment? What's the priority? I often hear myself giving advice that I think, I'm sure people would be really surprised to think that a dietitian would say that, because people think that all we want is for everybody to eat, I don't know, salad all day, every day, and nothing. Or people will so often say to me, oh, you'll think this is really bad, I'm eating this, or oh, you won't want to see this because it's chocolate or something. But it's actually about what are the challenges for this person right now. And if for this person right now the challenge for them is actually being able to make a meal or to be able to eat, then a piece of frozen bread out of the freezer and straight in the toaster and some beans out of the cupboard is a really good nutritious meal. And it's just seeing the bigger picture, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I love that. So now that we've established that cereal and bread is not the cause of all our issues as a society, can we pick your brains on what we do see as common problems in general practice with children, predominantly that could be related to their diets? And I think probably the commonest thing I see anyway, I'm sure you do, Claire, and I actually saw a child yesterday with constipation. So quite often we have children who just can't open their bowels regularly. They really struggle and they're quite often on medication, and parents will ask me, oh, how long do I have to continue the medications? When can they come off them? What changes to diets could people make to help with constipation, and would a plant-based diet help?
Yeah, absolutely. So it doesn't surprise me that it's one of the maybe more predominant childhood problems that you see in clinic. There can obviously be a really wide range of underlying causes of constipation. And I think, unfortunately, for whatever reason, sometimes laxatives can be used as a bit of a sticking plaster approach. I'm sure you've maybe seen that in practice as well, that there's never discussion around the diet or what the underlying causes might be or what the child's activity is like or how much they drink or any of these sorts of things. And it's sometimes that, just take this and try it and let's see if it helps. So it can definitely be an indication of things like an undiagnosed delayed food allergy or intolerance or childhood IBS and other bowel conditions potentially, as well as definitely being related to diet and poor hydration. I think on a population level, I've got no doubt whatsoever that increasing plant-based foods in children's diets would improve fibre intakes and would help with reducing the problem of constipation on a population level, but also with supporting the gut microbiome to thrive. And we know that could probably be a whole different episode. I think for anyone listening who's got a child with constipation, the main advice I would give would be to seek support. I think often we tend to kind of try, maybe we try things ourselves. We don't want to ask for help. We don't want to burden people, but ask for help firstly to rule out any underlying causes of constipation. And then I would really focus on optimizing the diet. So again, you see such a huge spectrum. So I've worked with children where fibre intake is absolutely minimal. And I've worked with children where fibre intake is probably far too high, and both of them can contribute to constipation. So it's about where the diet is at the moment and where the child is at now. Just as a very rough figure, if they're having 5 different fruits and vegetables each day and you're including some whole grain carbohydrates, so whole grain bread or whole grain pasta each day, they're probably getting about the right amount of fibre. For some people who are or understand that fibre is really important, they then feel that they can't give anything that's not a high fibre option. So I've worked with people where they're having loads of fruit and veg and pulses and whole grain bread and whole grain pasta and brown rice and everything. And sometimes the situation actually is maybe the child's having too much fibre, and that's also contributing to constipation. So it's a really individual thing in that sense. But on a population level, no doubt whatsoever that more fibre, more fruit and vegetables, more pulses and lentils and that kind of thing in children's diets would be really helpful. And then I think it's also really important to stress, again, just I guess highlighted from families that I've worked with, and I'm sure in your experience as well for both of you, that as much as we speak about sometimes laxatives are used as a sticking plaster, sometimes there's not any investigation into an underlying cause or what could we change that might stop us needing these. Some children just need laxatives. So they do obviously a brilliant job, and it is much better to use laxatives and not be constipated for your child than it is to not take them. So I always think it's really important to stress that, because I do work with families where we tried lots of different things, and for whatever reason, their child's, their diet's good, they drink well, they have plenty of fibre, they're active, they just need a bit of laxative to help them have a regular bowel habit. So it's not a bad thing. I think it's just a bad thing when it's used as a sticking plaster without any investigation as to what we could change or what lifestyle things we could change that might help. We know that fluid is a really important part of maintaining a healthy and comfortable bowel habit as well. And then there might be difference between what we want our children to drink and what they will agree to drink. Obviously, the ideal thing that we would want them to have would be water, maybe a little bit of fruit juice with breakfast and then water through the day. But if you have a child that just will not do that and just doesn't like drinking water, then there might be other things you can do to help support them have a better fluid intake. So it's all really individual, I think, and it's about finding approaches that work for an individual family and an individual child, but also allow them to maintain that focus on their child and not worry that they're doing something wrong, for example, because their child gets to have a drink of squash because they'll actually drink that, and it really helps to maintain a good bowel habit, where if they don't let them have it, they won't drink it and they'll be constipated.
Oh, I've got so many families I could send your way, Ailsa.
Well, send them.
Lovely advice. That's lovely advice.
Ailsa, Daisy and I were talking when we were coming up with the questions, and one of the things that we wanted to speak about was, I don't know if it's the right term, but sort of fussy eaters, and then what is the normal for your child being a fussy eater, which is just, having certain food preferences and maybe not wanting to eat everything that you're cooking for them, versus this new term, which is ARFID, the avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. So maybe to explore that a bit, because we hear a lot about children that limit themselves to beige foods, to chips and chicken nuggets, but we don't hear so much about children that will only eat fresh vegetables. So we wanted to explore with you why it seems so hard for children to be good at eating a range of vegetables. And within that, when should you worry that there might be something else going on that is beyond what your parenting practices can solve?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's another kind of great topic to discuss, and it is so complex, so multifaceted, and there's so much nuance with it. So I would always say there's a huge scale around fussy eating, which is the term that we would use, where you've got some children that are maybe at the bottom of that scale, where there's a bit of fussy eating, a bit of normal kind of early age fussy eating, that things like consistent boundaries and consistent mealtime management and clear messaging to them can help to overcome, right up to children with really profound and deeply really challenging sensory processing and food intake disorders such as ARFID. So it's a spectrum, and it's undoubtedly for some families extremely challenging, especially if you have knowledge about health, a focus on what you would like your child to eat, and it just isn't happening. It's just not working for them. That's really hard as a parent to think that what your child's doing isn't healthy or isn't what you want them to do. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that. And then also, it's just so variable. But I think often as parents, we blame ourselves for our children's fussy eating, or people will tend to think I must be doing something wrong, or I feel other people are looking at me because they're eating this food, but I know that that's just what they will eat. It's very, very difficult. There's nothing about anything, I would always say, to do with babies or children that is straightforward, it's hard, and you need to have a bit of a life jacket on, I think, to do it, and to be able to feel confident that what you're doing is okay, and you don't need to worry about what other people around you think. So it's firstly, I think, really important to just talk through that fussy eating is a very normal stage of child development. So it's very common, very normal that a child will start to wean maybe around 6 months. They'll be really enthusiastic at weaning. They'll do really well. They'll eat all kinds of different things that their parents give them. And maybe that continues until they're 18 months. And then you get to this phase where they're like, no, not having it. Don't want that. It's really normal, really frustrating, especially when you've gone, oh, amazing, like they wean so well, they're not fussy, they eat whatever I give them, and then that all changes. And that's a phase that people might be familiar with that we refer to as neophobia. So it just fear of the new. So they go through this stage of fear of the new where they think, oh, I don't really remember that, or I'm not that comfortable with that. That's not that familiar to me. I'm not going to have it. I'm not having that anymore. I used to have it, but I don't want that anymore. So it's a normal phase. And I think often for parents, when we hear, oh, actually it's okay that they're like that, it's not always a huge problem. It might just be a very normal phase of their development. I think it's also really important that we remember that children are just us but smaller. So they experience emotion, and they feel challenged by change and by differences in their environment and by learning and all of these things in just the same way that we do. So I would often use the example with parents that, like, if I'd had, I don't know, some bad news or a really stressful day and I just came home, that's not likely to be the time where I think, oh, I'm going to try something new for my tea tonight. That's much more likely to be the time where I think, I just want something that's really familiar. And I guess that's where the phrase comfort food probably comes from, that we want that comfort. So when you've got a child that is maybe starting childcare, they're starting nursery, they're starting to explore their environment a bit more, they're starting school, there's so many things around them that are changing, that are inconsistent, that they're having to process. That's a lot for them to take on, and a lot of change for them to go through, that it makes sense to a degree that they will want their food to be consistent, because they then think, I'm at school, I don't know what's going to be happening when I'm at school, I don't know what situations might happen in the playground, or what the teacher might say, or what the weather might be like, or any of those kinds of things, but I do know what's in my lunchbox, and that's okay. And that's often why they will want the same things. It's almost, we have to remember that so much in their environment is changing, and we all like bits of consistency in our lives, and children are like that too.
So it does make me wonder whether part of the problem is that in our Western diets, we give too much variety, because I was really struck by that episode of the Blue Zones where they go to Costa Rica and they show you, people that are really healthy because all they've eaten predominantly is sweet potato and beans, or that's the majority of the diet. And they show you then the children that were taken into the Western diet, and they won't eat rice, sweet potatoes, beans, because they've been exposed to all these other foods. So, maybe there is something to be said for making sure that your child has certain really healthy foods regularly, like soya mince or sweet potatoes. I don't know.
Yeah, a bit of consistency, definitely. I mean, I recently did, just for my own interest really, a poll on my Instagram page where I asked people, the adults, the people that follow me on Instagram generally are parents, adults that have got children, and I said, would you be the person who would be happy to eat the same lunch every day, which is what my husband is like, the same packed lunch for work every day? It is pretty healthy, which I always think, oh, that's my influence. Whereas for me, that would be like a nightmare. I couldn't imagine wanting to eat the same, opening the same thing and seeing the same sandwich and even the same types of fruit and veg that are in that box. That would absolutely not be for me. And when I asked people, the response was 50-50. So 50% roughly, in that not very well designed research, of people would be very happy to have the same thing every day. And half of us would absolutely not want that. I would want, loads of different colours and seeds and oils drizzled on it and all that kind of thing. But other people aren't like that. And our children are just like that. So often when people say, oh, they only want to eat the same thing for lunch every day, I don't know what to do, I say, well, what do you tend to have for your lunch? Do you do that? Or are they the same as you, or are they different to you? And it's also very much about our expectation as parents and our own preferences. So for me, I love food, love cooking, love trying with different recipes, and, would sit for hours reading recipe books and trying different things. But I've definitely got children and a husband who prefer more consistency, and they would be quite happy to eat the same 4 dinners on rotation. That would be totally fine for them. So some of it is about that. Some of it is about what our expectation is. But I think in terms of, to come back to your question about why do we see children that are happy with eating the same beige foods maybe all the time, but they're much less likely to be a child that will only eat carrots and broccoli and they won't eat anything else. If we use the example, say, of something like a strawberry, if I gave you a strawberry, you could look at it and you'd say, oh, that's a strawberry. I can guess what that's probably going to taste like. But if you bite it, it might be quite firm. It might be soft. It might be a really sweet one. It might not be very sweet. It might have the stalk and the leaves still attached to it, or it might not. They might have been cut off. And that's all really variable, and that's not predictable for a child. So a lot of fruit and vegetable is like that. So it can be, how's it been cooked? Is it hard? Is it crunchy? Is it soft? Is it mushy? Is it sweet? Is it a really sweet tasting carrot? Is it not a very sweet tasting one? Is it bitter? And all those kinds of things. Whereas with what we might call the beige foods, and I don't know that beige is, it's me that's saying it, I don't know if it's even that helpful a term, because actually beige foods can be really nourishing. There's loads of really good beige foods, but they will generally be more consistent. So a chip that's come out of the freezer and been cooked, I can make a pretty good guess at what that's going to smell like, what it's going to taste like, what texture it's going to be, and that kind of thing. So it removes that uncertainty and that unpredictability about food, I think. So that's probably a big part of the reason why we have so many children that are happy very consistently to eat those more beige, less variable foods, whereas with more colourful fruit and vegetables, there's more variation with them.
That's so interesting. And it reminds me of, I don't know if it was a generational thing when I was growing up, but we had just gone into the phase where we used to steam vegetables, and so they were quite firm and crunchy. And then I used to go to my nan's, and it would be this mush of carrots and cabbage, and I felt, even though it was the same food, I felt like I literally couldn't get it down. So yeah, that's you've kind of said what completely makes sense there.
Yeah, it's just the unpredictability and the variation of it, and just the effort, I think, often that's needed to eat things as well. So again, I would very often speak to parents who will be concerned that their child eats well through the day, but they just won't do very well at tea time. And you think, well, they've been up since, if they're like my children, 6 o'clock or sometimes before that. They've had loads of things to eat through the day. They've been really busy. They've played outside multiple times. They've done loads of different things. They get to the end of the day where they've already had probably 2 meals and, anything between 2 and 4 or more snacks. They maybe just aren't that hungry. And if you got to that stage in the day and then were presented with quite a complex meal that you needed to sit and, cut, or it was different textures, you had to chew it for a while, they might just be too tired. They might not be that interested in it. But I think in terms of when you said, when is it a problem? I would generally say when it kind of persists. So if you see phases of it where they're more fussy or less fussy, that's probably normal. But if it's persisting for a long time, and if you've got concerns that it's actually really limiting the nutrition that they're having, then I would definitely seek some support and seek some advice then, because it may be an indication of an underlying kind of sensory processing problem or another feeding disorder. But it also might really compromise their nutrition at a time that is, the most important probably over their life. It's that those early years are incredibly important.
Is that also the case if children are not growing to their potential, for example? That could be when to seek help.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in terms of children's growth, what we need to do, or what we want to do, is to optimize their growth and to make sure they meet their growth potential. So we are all very diverse, very different. You would never walk into a room of adults and expect them all to be the same height, for example. That would be bizarre if you did that. There's lots of different things that influence the way in which children grow. But what we would be interested in as dietitians, and definitely what we would want to support, is that their nutrition is optimized so that they meet their growth potential. So that doesn't mean that if you give child more and more and more nutrition, they will grow taller and taller and taller. That isn't the way it works. And for some children, they can be having excellent nutrition and growing along the second centile, and that's fine. But if they're growing along the second centile and they aren't having good nutrition, that maybe isn't fine, because they may not be meeting their growth potential. I think in terms of the evidence base that we have, we can be really reassured by the VCHI studies that growth for completely vegan children and for vegetarian children can be within very normal parameters. I know there's previously been discussion about, children that are completely vegan might be a little bit shorter than their non-vegan counterparts, which I imagine for people that are vegan from a moral or ethical standpoint is not really either here nor there. Like, does it make any difference whether a child is a centimetre taller or a centimetre shorter, as long as they're growing healthily? For people who are ethical vegans, the answer to that is probably no. It's not really making that much difference. That body of evidence is really reassuring. And then in terms of just other nutrients that we need to be really careful of, again, I think the vegan or plant-based children get an awful lot of, it's spoken about more because people consider that there might be risk associated with it. But we know, for example, that all babies and all children are at risk of becoming iron deficient if we don't feed them properly. That's a risk for anyone. So we should be thinking about that for all children, not just for vegan or plant-based ones. And actually, I would say in my experience as a paediatric dietitian, the most profound kind of iron deficiency and associated anemia that I've ever seen resulted from excessive intakes of cow's milk in children that were much older than should be drinking large volumes of milk. And I remember, it's a long time ago, but I can really remember being truly shocked as a dietitian working on a children's ward in an acute hospital, realising that there was a child on the ward having a blood transfusion because of anemia related to excessive cow's milk intake. And I remember being stunned by that, that it could be so profound. So risk of nutritional inadequacy or deficiency or nutritional intake not being optimized extends to everyone. It's not a thing that we should only be thinking about for one group, or that people who are plant-based or vegan should think, well, my child mustn't be getting the right things because this is the way that I'm feeding them. It's about thinking, where are they getting those nutrients from? And if that's all ticked off, then that's absolutely fine.
I need you to come over to where I live, Ailsa, because I went into my local fruit and veg shop the other day, and they sell a wonderful range of vegetables, including sweet potatoes and obviously kale and broccoli and spinach and lots of iron-rich foods. And I was met by a display in the window of bottles of milk, and then talking about what a great food milk was in terms of calcium and protein and all the rest of it. And I thought, it's actually criminal with the way that we promote that as a way of feeding your child. And it's no wonder that some children, if they have got a restriction to tastes or textures, that they end up stuck on it as a food.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's going back to that kind of old messaging really persisting, and people's beliefs still being based on things that were marketed or things that they saw on the TV or in the newspaper, sometimes decades and decades ago. I know I've got a granny still of my own who's in her 90s, and she very much believes that she's kind of, that she needs to drink copious amounts of milk because it's really good for your bones, or because it's really good. And she has that opinion because that's what she was fed, that's what she was told, that's what what was in media and in papers and what people said. I have said it before and would say it again, that children don't need cow's milk. They need calcium, they need protein, they need B vitamins, they need vitamin D, they need all these different things. That doesn't need to be from cow's milk. And I think particularly, even if we take away how people feel about the realities of the dairy industry, for people that have spent any time thinking about why cows are actually producing milk and what that's really for, from an environmental point of view, I think we need to be much better at promoting things that are environmentally more sustainable.
Can we just perhaps round things off by asking you about supplements? Would there be any particular supplements, though, that you would recommend that plant predominant children or plant-based children take?
Yeah, so in terms of supplements, it all needs to be, I think, quite individual, because it really depends on what the actual dietary pattern is. And even within a vegan or plant-based diet, what does that look like? Like how much of different things are they having? What fortified alternatives and things are being used? Definitely the absolute essentials for a vegan or plant-based child would be vitamin B12 and vitamin D, without any doubt. And then for many also iodine and omega-3 supplements, but that depends on what their overall dietary pattern looks like and how much of those nutrients appear in their diets. The Vegan Society baby and toddler supplement, Veg1, is a great option that I often recommend also for families that are not plant-based, because the preparation of it, the presentation of it, is just something that I have found is often accepted by young children, because it's a liquid that tastes like strawberry and the dose is small. Because often, again, one of the things that people really struggle with is just getting them to take it. You can have the best supplement, or you can know what you want them to have, but if they won't take it, you can't get them to do it. So it's a really good one, but it always needs to be considered individually and in the context of what their overall diet is like in terms of what we should be supplementing with.
Perfect. Yeah, listeners have heard us talk about Veg One before, and the Vegan Society really do need to sponsor us now, because we're not sponsored, but we take Veg One ourselves. So.
Yeah.
Right. So we're coming to the end, but what we're asking people about now, and we're now in June, is whether you could share with us your favourite seasonal vegetable and maybe about how you like to eat it.
Yeah, definitely. So it's not something that we cook, and I almost hesitate in saying this because I feel like it's really cliche for a dietitian to say it, but at the moment I would say that it is mixed salad leaves. And the reason for that is that we've been able to grow it at home ourselves in the garden. I live in the northeast of Scotland, so our climate here is a bit cooler, but it is brilliant for growing lots of things. And our strawberries are brilliant as well, that farmers grow up here. But salad grows really nicely. And what I really like about it just now is that my children have been able to plant it, see it grow, go out and pick some of it, and then we just put a bit of oil and lemon on it. And my 5-year-old, who is a really good eater and pretty adventurous with things, she loves it. 3-year-old, absolutely not interested in eating it. But again, when we were speaking about fussy eating, getting them seeing it and picking it and seeing, well, that's where that came from and that's what's now on the table, that's still really good exposure for them. So she is my work in progress in terms of getting her to eat a little bit more, and has definitely helped me understand a bit more about the realities of being a parent of a child who is on the fussier end of the spectrum, and the patience that needs. But yeah, it would be salad, because we can go out and pick it in the garden.
Right, that's brilliant. But how many months of salad season do you think you're going to get in Scotland?
Yeah, one of the mistakes we often make is that we don't pick it enough, and then it bolts and becomes really bitter. But I think if we keep eating it, then many months. I would hope into kind of maybe September, October. We'll see.
Right. Yeah, because the other thing that Scotland, they're getting rather excited about, I don't know whether it's a particular part of Scotland, is the potential for growing beans. We know that we need to grow more pulses in this country, and I think they're sort of eyeing it up, some of the land for growing things like soya beans or fava beans.
Yeah, I would absolutely love to see that. I mean, I think we have to, it's a really agricultural area. The northeast of Scotland particularly is huge in agriculture. And I think, farming community is really important and has been for centuries here. If they were growing soya beans here, I would absolutely be buying them.
And Daisy, have you got anything seasonal to add?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because I was going to say about leafy greens, although my seasonal veg is watercress. For today, I'm not growing it though. I hasten to add, I'm buying it. But I'm just slightly obsessed with watercress at the moment, because I, a bit like you were saying, when your taste buds change as well, don't they? So as a younger person, I didn't really particularly like watercress. I found it quite bitter. But as an adult, absolutely love it at the moment. So I'm just putting it on top of whatever we're eating. So if we have like a pasta dish or something like that, I'll just put some on top, and it adds like a really crunchy, peppery, and loving watercress in June. What about you, Claire?
I don't have anything specific. I've got some chard in my veg box, so I think I'm going to be going for that later. I know that must be seasonal because everything's grown locally and recently, presumably, in there. But coming back to the watercress, we were talking earlier, weren't we, about I tried to grow some, and I ordered some little watercress plants, and you have to sort of pick a kind of swampy area of your garden. I did all of that, but of course I went out 2 days later, they were just gone, completely chomped.
Really?
Which is such a shame, because just you talking about that reminded me of how much I used to love having just a watercress sandwich. when I was first vegetarian, because I'd read about how much iron it contained, and obviously being a new vegetarian, I was worried about my iron levels. So I used to pack it into a sandwich and sort of almost have this really dense layer of watercress just with some margarine on the bread.
Iron and calcium apparently as well, I was reading. I mean, who would have thought watercress has got all these nutrients? So good for you.
Yeah.
And so just to remind listeners that you can connect with Ailsa. Her Instagram handle is Little Nutrition with Ailsa, and the website is littlenutrition.co.uk, where she offers packages to support weaning, nutritional challenges and plant-based diets. But listen, thank you so much, Ailsa, for having this chat with us. We were really, really looking forward to this episode, and we've covered so much. We've still got so many more questions, but yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have joined you, and I think, so many interesting things to talk through, and likewise, I probably could have spoken on for hours about any one of those questions. So I hope your listeners have found it really helpful and thought-provoking as well.
Definitely. You'll have to come back for round 2 in the future.
Definitely.
Thank you.